One day about 9 months ago, I noticed the Instagram app was offloaded from my iPhone in order to save more storage. And it's been a couple months since I had not really been using Instagram to begin with. But this was the moment where I really thought to myself, how long can I go without actually downloading this app again? And so I thought it would be a couple days, couple weeks at most, but turns out it has been over 9 months at this point. There are a couple other things that I think are worth noting if you are someone who's considering maybe taking a break off social media as well. So the first thing that I notice is that there's FOMO of viral stuff. So the trends and viral clips that are all going around, those aren't going to be coming on your feed because you're not going to be scrolling. And so what happens is people will hit you with this a lot. What? You haven't seen that yet? But then I find that they proceed to actually show you the thing that they're talking about anyways. So you will come across that clip. It may just be later. And so if that gives you a little bit of anxiety, like, I'm going to be a little cut off from the world, the trends, that does happen a bit. The second thing I noticed is missing DMs. So of course, if you don't have an app on your phone and someone is DMing you or forwarding you clips and things like that, you are going to feel a sense of, like, I don't want them to feel like I'm, not reading their message, or, do people know that I'm not really reading my DMs? So the important stuff will find its way to your phone or your inbox. But in the beginning, if you use the DM feature heavily on some of these social media apps, that is something that you're going to have to reconcile with. How do you want to handle that? There's actually a comedian, Nimesh Patel, who used to delete the app every day off his phone and only download it so he could kind of post to it, or he could check the DMs and scan through them for any shows or gigs that he had sitting there, and then he would delete the app again. So there's all sorts of workarounds that you can use if you find that this is important to you. The third thing that I found is, of course, you feel this urge to scroll, right? You're used to maybe scrolling, and so you're gonna find yourself wanting to replace it with something. And so for me, one of the things that I noticed is that I started checking my email more. I started checking my analytics more. I started just opening random apps that are in my field of vision on the home screen more. And I would say YouTube is the app that I actually consume on and I create on the most. And so Instagram wasn't even the thing that I was pulled towards opening up and actually scrolling in the first place. For me, it's YouTube. And so I did find through a period of time that, hey, I'm on YouTube and I'm scrolling the same way that I might on an Instagram or TikTok, to the point where I'm seeing some of the same stuff I already scrolled earlier in the day. And so that is something that you want to be aware of, is that you will replace it with something. And so have another app or another behavior that you want to replace it with every time you feel the urge to open it up. Now, the fourth thing that I noticed is when you are in social situations, you will notice that other people are way more attached to their phone because they're scrolling whatever social media app they use, and you are not, right? And sometimes that, like you not being on your phone when everyone else is, does feel funny. And so you're going to experience moments of that because you will get used to not having that urge to pick up your phone. The fifth thing is notification fatigue. So I love that I do not get any more notifications from Instagram and all of these other apps that I used to, because I would eventually begin getting notifications that I didn't even agree to, right? So certain updates happen, or somebody posts something new, somebody joins the app. It's like, I thought I turned this off already, right? And so you will begin to notice that, especially if you wear some type of a smartwatch, getting hit with those notifications and it distracting you even for a second to like look at your watch can be detrimental for focus and context switching. And so a huge part of the mental clarity is just not having the notifications coming your way in the first place. Now, the sixth thing that I found is that you do feel this FOMO for a bit. And this wasn't in the beginning. It's more like, I don't know, around this 9-month mark where it's actually making me consider going back to social media. And it is this feeling of not being able to support people that you want to support. And so whether it is keeping up with friends and family and because I found that Instagram, for example, has become where my parents and people who are older are on Instagram now, right? It's kind of like how Facebook was at first. And so it's becoming more adopted, where it felt funny to me, like the second that my parents are on here now is when I'm taking a break. And so it can feel like, okay, you do feel like you're not a part of this collective, right? That is on Instagram. It feels like something that everybody else has in common that you don't after a little while. So that is just a feeling that comes up here and there that you might want to be aware of. Now, the seventh thing that I noticed is, of course, being a business owner who was using social media, I felt this pull to still be on it in some way. And so the way that I got through this workaround was basically using a tool called Buffer and using, someone on my team. So basically being able to not open up the Instagram app or LinkedIn app or TikTok ever, but when I have a short form clip to actually publish to there, being able to still have that going on in the background. Now, this creates some trade-offs where, okay, because I'm not actually on those apps, I'm not able to respond to those comments. I'm not even seeing those comments most of the time in the first place. So that might be a helpful fix for you if you are using social media for business and you still feel like, okay, I want to take a break from this. What's cool is you can actually give the wheel to somebody who enjoys doing this stuff. So aside from having a software like Buffer and a team member to help keep you present on some of the platforms, one of the things that you can do is decide to go hard on some of the subscription-based platforms, which is what I did. I found myself kind of prioritizing too much energy for things like Instagram, which I didn't really care about in the first place. And then the leftovers were going to places like YouTube and the important stuff that I wanted to put time into. And turns out those were the areas that were giving me the most return and results anyways. So this kind of originated from me being like, I'm doubling down on YouTube. I'm not going to really think about Instagram and TikTok as much anymore, things like that. And so I find that you can still make up for whatever loss you are envisioning. You can make up for that if you put in effort, and depending on what that is, right? It might take some time. If you've invested literally a decade into Instagram, like you might need to, take you some time to build that up with something like YouTube or an email list to basically be able to replace that asset, right? Or not have to rely on it as much. But I think this really begs the question of, is there a way out? Is there really a way out when you are using social for business? You do feel tied to it in some way where you can't completely exit. You are going to use it in some fashion, whether it's maybe LinkedIn, whether it's YouTube, or whether it's podcasts, right? But at least in those formats, I think that the tax on your brain and on your health long term is nowhere near what it is when you're consuming things on TikTok and Instagram at lightning fast speeds. The next thing that I noticed is that I started writing and reading more, which is really a placeholder for saying you'll start to do things that you've been wanting to do, but just felt like you didn't have the time for, right? Or the time existed, but it was maybe being wasted by just senseless scrolling. And so for me, the first variation of this in the first couple months was the Notes app. So because the Notes app is something that I capture things in and I write things in constantly, I would spend more time in there and I would treat the reviewing of older notes, whether it's a couple years ago or a couple days or months ago, as kind of like my own version of scrolling, where I feel like I'm scrolling my own brain instead of everyone else's brain. Then over time, it turned into using more physical notebooks. So I've always used, larger journals and things like that since, probably 15 years now at this point. But using pocket notebooks is something that I started to take seriously more. And it became a way to kind of like inject the energy that would go towards picking up the phone and, getting on Instagram, right? Instead of that, this pocket notebook is something that stays on top of or near my phone at all times. And so it's a physical reminder of like, wait, maybe just open this and write what you're thinking instead. Or, there's a couple problems that or projects that I might be working on that, hey, you might be able to just think on this problem for a few minutes and not think about some of the other stuff that's being served to you. So quality thinking time, I feel like I have gotten back. Now, in regards to the reading aspect, I found myself just noticing this from having higher quality inputs. So the inputs that were coming in were no longer, news clips and articles and long form stuff that is just one after another coming your way. But now it is, I'm choosing what I want to kind of input into my brain. And so it felt more curated, felt more intentional, like I had more control over what I wanted to enter. And so I guess I would describe the feeling to maybe eating sugar all day and not really noticing how that kind of feels. But then when you switch over to like, oh, I'm going to, get a decent amount of protein every day instead. And, that obviously will change how your brain and body begins to feel. And you're like, oh, that's a new feeling. It's been so long since I've had sugar every day all day that I'm now noticing what it's like to have protein now that I've introduced it into my diet. And so whatever you're reading is like protein because there's just more brain activity and exercise that's actually going on there versus when you're passively consuming and scrolling things like TikTok and Instagram. The next thing that I noticed, which I'm sure has some kind of effect on my dopamine itself, but the anticipation that you feel of like, oh, I can't wait to go check this, or I can't wait to go catch up on what I'm missing out on here, right? That you don't have as much, because if that was happening literally once every couple minutes or once every 5 or 10 minutes, like the space between that is much more. So it may not go away altogether. It may be you don't feel that urge for a couple hours at a time now, and then maybe a day or two at a time, right? I still find when I'm away from my phone for long periods of time, I enjoy going through my YouTube and scrolling, passively. The other thing I noticed, which is really hopeful, is that your detection of the trigger is way sharper. So in the beginning, you may not notice when you quit the app and you turn off your phone, and before you know it, you're back on the app again, right? And you're like, how did that happen? I don't even remember doing that. So you will find yourself catching yourself way, way more as you do this longer and longer. So now, even though I might find myself scrolling on YouTube, right? I typically will get the notification, hey, you've hit your limit for the day. And, then I might just exit out, but I'm more aware that that is what I'm doing versus previously I may not have been, which is another reason why having a pocket notebook like this to funnel your energy into can be so valuable. Because as soon as you detect that trigger, it's going to happen multiple times a day. You have something you can immediately replace it with. So I hope this was helpful if you're also considering taking a break from social media in any way, shape, or format. I appreciate you taking the time. Make sure to drop a comment. If you've done this before or you're planning to do it, I'd love to hear what you're thinking about it and what some of the hardest parts were for you. But I appreciate you taking the time and hanging out, and I will see you on the next one.